Hello, my name is Timothy Regan, and this is Claude Kitchin's Crusade. The Tar Heel State reluctantly enters the Great War, 1914 to 1918. And this is really the story of North Carolina, World War I, and involvement by the United States. My project addresses something that I think is lacking in historical scholarship, and that is an adequate analysis of the voices of opposition to American involvement in World War I. I think too often we study just those who went over to fight, as if there was some foregone conclusion that the United States would automatically ride in and save Europe from itself. But there was a loud and rather influential voice of opposition, and that came from right here in North Carolina, and this comes from North Carolina's 2nd District Representative Claude Kitchin, who, from his position as House Majority Leader and Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, had quite a voice in the opposition movement to American entry to the war. He spent several years leading up to America's entry to the war in 1917, speaking out against preparedness movements by the Wilson administration. He worked tirelessly from about 1915 through April of 1917 to educate his own constituents as well as Americans across the country about what he considered our already prepared military. In a popular nationwide magazine, he published an article describing how the United States was already prepared, and the fact was that we already had the best Navy in the world, behind only Great Britain's. So in terms of military preparedness, he thought we need not do very much more at all. He received countless letters of support from his own constituents as well as from Americans around the country, supporting his position in this anti-preparedness stance. Many Americans, like he, thought that the United States really didn't have any benefits to entering World War I, so they made their support of not entering this war known to him. And that support really helped drive him to let him know that he was on the right side of this argument. And in 1916, when Woodrow Wilson was running his re-election campaign, one of his famous slogans was that he had kept the country out of war, while Kitchin and his own circle were saying to themselves, we kept him out of war because we educated the country about the already prepared military. But it was becoming more and more clear that a majority of the country actually did want to enter World War I on the side of the Allies, which was particularly frustrating for Claude Kitchin because he thought that Germany's use of unrestricted submarine warfare against American ships was almost as devastating to our economy as the British blockade of certain ports in the North Atlantic. But he ended up in the minority. He knew that the country was inching closer towards war, but he had to stick to his convictions, and he knew that he was on the losing side of this, but he knew that he had to represent those people who were sending him those letters of support. So he ended up voting against America's entry to the war, and he made one last final-ditch effort on the House, and it was a very dramatic scene. He took to the House floor shortly after midnight, and in the newspapers indicates that it was raining outside, so especially dramatic scene. And he basically said, I know we're going to declare war, I know I'm going to be on the losing side of this, but I cannot vote in favor of going to war. I've prayed for guidance, and I must vote against this resolution. And like he predicted, he was on the losing side. The vote ended up being 373 in favor of going to war in the House and 50 against. Some sources describe them as the immortal 50 in a kind of a callback to an earlier childhood experience of his, where his father was a member of an immortal number of people. So he really failed to change the minds of enough of his colleagues in Congress to stop the United States from entering the war, and he recognized reality, and once the U.S. was involved in the war, he decided to throw himself into the war effort because he, as the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, he had the real authority and power to help finance this war. And so that's what he did. And through the course of America's involvement in the war, Kitchin almost literally worked himself to death. He ended up suffering a stroke. It didn't take him out of office. He remained congressman until he died. So he died in office. And he is kind of a forgotten figure today. So this project is really kind of a reclamation from the dustbin of history project to bring this rather important person back to the national conversation. Now, there were some negative aspects about Kitchin, too, and he does kind of have a checkered past, but for his involvement in America's involvements in World War I, we really should remember him more than we do. Thank you.